December 19, 2003. A single sheet of paper lay on a desk inside Bank of America's Milan office, and a compliance officer kept staring at it. The letter claimed a subsidiary of Italy's most beloved food company held nearly 4 billion euros in a Cayman Islands account. Every seal looked correct. Every signature looked bank official. And yet something about the document felt subtly, almost comically wrong, the way a counterfeit note feels lighter than it should. Across Europe, families were pouring milk from cartons stamped with this company's cheerful logo. Investors treated its bonds as safe as government debt. But the letter on that desk was about to detonate the largest bankruptcy in European history. What the officer noticed in the next few minutes was so small it should have meant nothing. It meant everything. To understand how a forged fax could topple a $10 billion empire, you have to meet the company behind it. Parmalat began in 1961 as a modest pasteurization plant near the city of Parma, founded by a young entrepreneur who inherited his father's deli business. His breakthrough was simple and brilliant. Long-life milk in aseptic cartons that could sit on a shelf for months without refrigeration. It felt like magic to post-war Italian households. From that single innovation, the company sprawled outward. Yogurt, juice, biscuits, a football club, a Formula One sponsorship, tourism ventures, television projects. By the late 1990s, Parmalat operated in 30 countries and employed 36,000 people. Its founder became a national icon, the plain-spoken dairyman who conquered the world. But somewhere inside that expansion, the milk money stopped being enough, and the numbers began to drift away from reality. The problem with buying everything is that everything costs money you don't have. Parmalat's overseas empire, factories in Brazil, dairies in Venezuela, ventures across Latin America, bled cash for years. Instead of admitting the losses, executives borrowed. Then they borrowed to pay the borrowing. Bond after bond flooded onto European markets, marketed to ordinary savers who trusted the friendly carton on their kitchen table. To keep the lenders calm, the company needed to show one thing above all: liquidity, cash on hand, reassuring enormous balances sitting in respectable banks. So it invented them. On paper, Parmalat claimed to be sitting on billions in cash even while it was frantically issuing new debt. Analysts occasionally ask the obvious question: why does a company drowning in cash keep begging to borrow more? The answer for years was silence. Here is the first small mystery, and it nagged a handful of skeptics long before the collapse. A healthy, cash-rich company pays down expensive debt. It does not keep taking on more at high interest. Yet Parmalat did exactly that, year after year, insisting it held mountains of money it never touched. One rating analyst quietly downgraded them, puzzled by the contradiction. A few short sellers circled, but the company's reputation was armor. It was old, it was Italian, it was everywhere, and its founder was untouchable. When journalists pressed, executives waved documents proving the cash was real. Statements from prestigious banks, confirmations from offshore subsidiaries with reassuring names. The paperwork always checked out. Nobody, for a very long time, thought to ask the most childish question of all: who actually typed these documents, and how? The keystone of the entire illusion was a subsidiary called Parmalat, incorporated in the Cayman Islands. Parmalat was where the fictional money went to live. According to Parmalat's books, Parmalat held roughly $395 billion in an account at Bank of America, a colossal comforting sum that plugged the growing hole in the balance sheet. Auditors, understandably, wanted proof, so Parmalat produced it, a formal letter, on Bank of America letterhead, confirming the account and its enormous balance. That single document quietly propped up the confidence of lenders, auditors, and rating agencies for years. As long as that letter existed and looked genuine, the empire stood. It was the load-bearing wall of the whole fraud. And in December 2003, someone finally decided to verify it the simplest way imaginable, by asking the bank itself. The unraveling started not with a raid, but with a routine. Parmalat had missed a bond payment, a $150 million redemption it somehow couldn't cover, despite the billions it claimed to hold. That contradiction, ignored for years, suddenly became impossible to explain. Markets panicked. The stock cratered. And auditors, now nervous, sent that Bank of America confirmation letter directly to the bank for authentication. This is the moment the loop from our cold open closes. Bank of America looked at the letter that had underpinned billions in trust, examined the account it supposedly described, and gave an answer that ended everything in a single sentence. The account did not exist. The letter was a forgery. The $395 billion was not misplaced or frozen or tied up. It had simply never been there at all. Now the detail, the tiny, almost comic tell that historians of the case still marvel at. The forged letter had not been produced by any bank. It had been created inside Parmalat's own offices. And investigators later reconstructed how. Someone typed a fake confirmation, printed it, then ran the page through a fax machine and photocopied the result. Why? Because a crisp original might reveal wrong fonts, wrong logos, wrong formatting. But a document that has been faxed and photocopied becomes deliberately degraded, grainy, softened, slightly smeared, exactly the way a real bank's resent confirmation would look. The imperfection was the disguise. They didn't forge a perfect letter. They forged a convincingly imperfect one. The fraud's greatest strength was a smudge. It gets more absurd. Reports from the investigation described the forgery being manufactured with almost slapstick crudeness, a scanner, a paste-up of the Bank of America letterhead, a fax transmission designed to blur the seams. For years, this photocopied ghost had reassured some of the most sophisticated financial institutions on Earth. Pension funds bought Parmalat bonds because of the confidence that letter created. Grandmothers in Rome held their savings in it. And the whole structure rested on a piece of paper that had been deliberately dirtied to look authentic. Here is the original lesson buried in the smudge. Fraud rarely dies from a grand contradiction. It dies from a texture. A font that's slightly off, a photocopy that's slightly too clean, a signature that leans the wrong way. The forensic world calls these tells. Parmalat's tell was ink. Once the letter fell, everything fell with it. Investigators descended on Parmalat's headquarters and found a company held together by fiction. Internally, staff spoke of documents being shredded and computers being smashed with hammers as the raids approached. One manager reportedly tried to physically destroy a laptop holding the forgery software. Prosecutors uncovered a nested web of shell entities, doctored invoices, and duplicated debt. The true whole was not $4 billion. It was closer to $14 billion, roughly 8 times larger than the company had ever admitted. Parmalat had been insolvent for years, while presenting itself as one of Europe's safest names. The friendly milk carton, it turned out, had been printing not just long-life milk, but long-life lies, each one carefully faxed into the shape of respectability. The human toll was enormous. More than 100,000 small investors, ordinary Italians who thought they'd bought something boring and safe, saw their holdings evaporate. Parmalat's bonds became almost worthless overnight. The founder was arrested and eventually sentenced to years in prison. Other executives faced trials that stretched across a decade. Bank of America itself, whose forged letter had been weaponized, became entangled in years of litigation over what it knew and what it should have caught. The scandal earned a nickname. Europe's Enron. But the comparison undersells the strangeness. Enron collapsed under exotic partnerships and derivatives few could understand. Parmalat collapsed under a photocopier. One was a labyrinth. The other was a smudged sheet of paper anyone could have questioned, and almost no one did. Sir, why did the fraud survive so long? Here is the uncomfortable answer, and it's the real insight of this story. Everyone in the chain assumed someone else had already checked. Auditors trusted the bank letter. Rating agencies trusted the auditors. Investors trusted the ratings. Regulators trusted the reputation. Trust was passed down the line like a bucket in a fire brigade, and not one person turned around to confirm the bucket actually held water. The forged facts worked precisely because verification had become a ritual instead of a test. A phone call to Bank of America, the thing that ended it all in December 2003, could have ended it years earlier. It cost nothing. It took minutes. That is the terror of the story. The fraud wasn't sophisticated. Our attention was just lazy. There's a final sobering wrinkle. When the letter was finally verified, the person who caught it wasn't a genius forensic accountant with a supercomputer. It was a routine authentication request, a boring compliance step that should have been standard practice all along. The billion-euro empire didn't fall to brilliance. It fell to procedure finally being followed. And that reframes every earlier warning sign. The company begging to borrow while claiming to be rich, the analysts quietly puzzled, the short sellers circling. All of them had smelled the smoke. What was missing wasn't intelligence. It was the willingness to be the one annoying person who says, "Prove it." Parmalat teaches that the most dangerous documents in finance aren't the complicated ones. They're the ones so mundane, so official-looking, that everyone forgets to check whether they're real. Today, a reformed Parmalat still exists, sold off and restructured, its brand surviving on shelves under new ownership. But the case rewrote how European auditors treat bank confirmations. No more accepting a faxed letter at face value. Verification now flows directly and independently to the source. A generation of accounting students still study the smudged Bank of America letter as a masterclass in how simplicity can hide in plain sight. The greatest fraud in European history was undone not by a whistleblower or a hero, but by the physical texture of a photocopy that tried a little too hard to look tired. It's a reminder that the biggest lies often carry the smallest fingerprints. If stories like this, where one overlooked detail topples an empire, grip you, subscribe to Bull and Bust. There's always another smudge waiting to be seen.